Yeah, I know. It's been a minute. It's been a minute since I hit my rear end and started planting my face into the steering wheel here. So it's time for a confessional. It's been time. There are plenty of discussions, plenty of topics that I could bring to you. And it looks like a gentleman has already kind of forced my hand here. And the gentleman I'm talking about happens to be, it's more than one. And it's so much to unpackage. Joe Rogan and the whole Spotify controversy. I'm pretty sure you can quickly Google and see what's happening if you're not informed. And the whole deal with Neil Young and other artists. I will say this one. There was one that I kind of understood when they explained why they pulled out of Spotify, why they got off of that platform, and it was Eve 6. They have a famous song called Here's to the Night. They did pretty well in the late 90s and into the early 2000s. And they actually said in their description, this has nothing to do with Joe Rogan or Neil Young, or it has to do with Spotify is only paying us fractions of a penny to be on this platform. And I can't get mad at that. So this is just me speaking. And before I even begin to try to even dissect in any way or unpackage what's been going on with Spotify and with Joe Rogan and Neil Young, I have to ask myself, has censorship like this happened before? And the answer is absolutely it has. Excuse me. And the most recent example I can think of goes back a few decades to something called the Red Scare. If you don't know what I'm talking about, it means you are not well versed in history. Or at least you haven't studied the Cold War close enough. And that's not anything that I'm not trying to downplay anybody here, but if you don't know what the Red Scare is, it was a time period where, in particular, one of the big mouthpieces was a guy named John McCarthy. You can quickly look into that story and see how McCarthyism became almost like a neo-fascism in America, where anybody who spoke out against him or spoke out against somebody in his party, somebody in his organizations, they would quickly point a finger and allegedly accuse someone who was in opposition that they must be a communist. They must be part of a communist party or some organization like that. And it's going on during the Red Scare. There was even a Texas radio star, if I remember this correctly, I think his name was John Henry Falk. He was from Texas. He was a radio personality in New York City. And the McCarthy Legion shut him down. And he sued for $3.5 million. He won, but he never got back on to the radio again. So that kind of is an extreme situation. So these kind of things are happening. There's a lot of finger pointing that happens. I will bring this back full circle, mind you. But there comes a point where somebody finally puts Mr. McCarthy in his place. It's a famous moment in history where Mr. Welch says to John McCarthy on live television during a lot of the McCarthy hearings where, this person's accused of being a communist, this one is, then finally it comes down to where it's not even about what's good for the country, it's about who can McCarthy bully next. And at some point, Mr. Welch just cuts him off and straight up uses one of the most famous phrases through all of the Cold War. And the phrase is, "Have you no decency, sir?" I have to look at it and go, this has happened before. To where if you are pulling off of a hosting platform like Spotify, or even if it was Apple, to where somebody just comes out and says, "Have you no decency?" And I feel like our friend, Mr. Ozeal of Pod Houston and Pod Influence, did that. Giving him a personal shout out on here. I don't think he'll mind that, because he has a lot more to say about it, since this is just a very brief confessional coming from yours truly. But there's not a thing that he said that I didn't agree with. I just have to bring to the forefront, has this happened before? And yes, it has. And a lot of people want to get behind the idea of freedom of expression, and it seems like it stops there. We should have the freedom to say whatever we want. Well, if we look in the law of the land, that is very much personified in the First Amendment, known as the Constitution of the United States. But it's more than that. It actually is more of freedom of religion, freedom to assemble peacefully, to petition the government, and freedom of speech is included in the exercise of all of these things. But there is another one that people don't talk about. That's what my job is. I'm not here to entertain or to edify like I do with my 3 E's. I'm just here to educate. And there is a article in something you can find online in the Charter of the United Nations. You can look it online, un.org. Article 19 specifically says that every person should have the right to exercise their opinion regardless of the frontier. Now, I'm abbreviating it, okay? That is a very simplified answer. And that is where I stand. Can the United Nations Charter be exercised everywhere in the world as law of the land? No, it can't. Sometimes pure capitalism can fall prey to it. Simple profit can fall to it. But either way, Neil Young, if you want to go to a different platform, then by all means. Joe Rogan, I don't really feel that sorry for him. It comes down to, am I worried about the profit that he's made? Not necessarily. The guy's been in the game since the mid-2000s, when the podcast actually became a podcast, when the iPod was relevant. I mean, look at the name, for goodness sakes. The word podcast started with the iPod, but as time goes on, technology surpasses it, and nobody calls it a phone cast. Doesn't make any sense, because this is literally the iPod and YouTube and talk radio have converged into one solo platform, known as the podcast. And am I defending podcasters here? I'm just kind of throwing some simple things out. I can tell you I'm on the side of history. I am not on the side of political correctness. I am on the side of Article 19 of the United Nations Charter. I am on the side of the First Amendment in the U.S. Constitution. This is where I stand. And I am appreciative anybody who comes out and uses the same approach that Welch used against Mr. McCarthy when enough was enough and they spoke up and simply said, "Have you no decency?" Again, it's not really what solidified the end of the Cold War. It just ended McCarthy's career in many ways on national television. So, am I truly affected by the whole controversy with Joe Rogan? No. Am I siding with Neil Young? No. Am I siding with Spotify? No. I mean, Spotify and Nintendo, Spotify, and Apple are like the Nintendo versus Sega of the podcasting world. But no, that is not the only platforms. You want to be on there if you can to get more exposure, but there's so many other ones that we can take. And I can tell you that if you're worried about something happening to this page on YouTube, well, you guys can find me on Spreaker. You guys can find me on Ko-fi.com. You can find me on yourfavoriteblockhead.com/blog. I have my other outlets. Yes, I believe in this as a creative outlet, whether it's the YouTube videos or whether it's the podcast. If I got something to say, I'm going to say it there. But I'm appreciative that we've all kind of chewed on this for a while, and now that the dust is kind of settling, that's where I stand. I will support Article 19 of the United Nations, and anybody should go read that you have the freedom of expression across any, regardless of the frontier, across any medium that you choose. And when that starts becoming deleted, then it's time for us to get up and use our voices. And if you feel strongly about this, then we'll lock arms in the podcasting world. I believe a lot of us already are. And I don't listen to Neil Young's music, so what do I care? And if I'm listening to Joe Rogan, it's probably not because I'm listening to the COVID-19 talks. It's probably because I might be looking back as far as his conversation with Jake the Snake Roberts over Andre the Giant. Those are into wrestling might appreciate that interview. Or I might be looking back at his interview with Metallica's lead man, James Hetfield, about his abandonment issues and the documentary Some Kind of Monster. These are things that will lure me back. It goes back to podcasting will always shed its skin and reveal different colors as time goes on. But if you don't like something you hear on the radio or on YouTube or on podcasting, it's got a thing called change the station. It's got a thing called you can exit out of this and move on with your life. What happened to that? And I think Oziel said it more explicitly when he did his video. But those that want to be part of the blaming culture and want to find any reason to put down somebody's freedom of expression, go read Article 19 of the United Nations. And I ask you the same thing. If you're getting all wound up about this, I guess go have yourself a root beer float on me and remind yourself to have some decency.